All right, get ready to dive deep, because today we're exploring the sizzling world of cooking chemistry.
We're going beyond those recipes, and love
Oh,
to
today.
understand how everyday ingredients transform into, well, culinary masterpieces.
I like to think I'm a pretty decent cook, but a lot of times I'm just relying on intuition
Mm.
rather than, really understanding the science behind what's going on.
Well, get ready for some serious aha moments
Okay.
because we're about to break down those invisible reactions
Yeah.
that create the flavors, the aromas, and the textures that we all crave.
Perfect. So let's start with the basics: water, fats, and proteins. I mean, those are the fundamental components of pretty much everything we cook, right?
Exactly. And each one plays a crucial role in how heat transforms our food.
Okay.
Take water, for example. It's an amazing conductor of heat.
Hmm.
And make sure everything cooks evenly, whether you're boiling pasta or simmering a stew. But here's something you might not know. Steaming can actually help retain more nutrients. Studies have shown that steaming broccoli can preserve up to like 50% more vitamin C
Wow.
compared to boiling.
Interesting. So it's like a gentle sauna for your veggies, locking in those good-for-you vitamins.
That's a great way to put it.
What about fats? I feel like they always get a bad rap.
Well, fats are actually essential for flavor and texture. They act as flavor carriers. Think about how butter just enriches a sauce, or olive oil adds depth to like a stir fry.
Yeah.
They also let us cook at those higher temperatures because they have a higher smoke point.
Okay.
You know, searing a steak in hot oil wouldn't be the same without those beautiful, flavorful crusts we get. That's from the Maillard reaction.
Okay, so that explains why chefs are always so adamant about patting meat dry before searing. It's not just about preventing splattering, it's about maximizing those Maillard flavors. I always thought that caramelization was the same thing, but now I'm realizing they're two different processes.
You're right, they both create browning,
Yeah.
they both create deliciousness.
Hmm.
But caramelization really focuses on those sugars breaking down under high heat,
Okay.
which create those sweeter notes that we find in, things like caramelized onions or creme brulee.
It's amazing how something as simple as slow cooking onions can completely transform their flavor, all thanks to caramelization.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about proteins. Those are the building blocks of texture in our food.
Hmm.
Basically, when we apply heat to proteins, they denature. Basically means their structure unravels,
Mm.
and that leads to changes in texture. Like think about a runny egg white solidifying when cooked, or why overcooked meat becomes tough.
Oh, that makes sense. I've always wondered why different meats need different cooking times. Does the type of protein affect that?
Absolutely. Different proteins denature at different temperatures,
Hmm.
and that affects their ideal cooking times. So that's why a delicate fish cooks so much faster than, let's say, a tougher cut of beef.
Right.
Understanding that can really help us achieve that perfect doneness, whether it's a medium rare steak or a nice flaky piece of fish.
It's fascinating how even slight changes in temperature can totally change how things turn out.
It's true.
Okay, let's talk more about this Maillard reaction. I know it's responsible for that amazing browning we see on food, but what's really happening at a molecular level?
So it's a super complex chain reaction between amino acids and sugars. And this really kicks in when the food is heated to a very specific temperature range, usually somewhere around 140 to 165 degrees Celsius.
Mm.
And this reaction creates hundreds of flavor compounds. These give us those savory umami notes in meat or the caramel notes in bread.
So it's not just about the browning, it's about unlocking this whole world of flavor.
Exactly.
I've heard that moisture can really mess with the Maillard reaction. Is
Yeah.
that why so many recipes say to pat your meat dry before you sear it?
That's exactly right. Excess moisture creates steam,
Hmm.
and that can actually prevent the surface temperature from getting high enough for the Maillard reaction to take place.
Hmm.
So having a dry surface lets those complex flavors develop and gives you that beautiful brown crust.
Makes total sense. And speaking of browning, is that where oxidation comes in?
You got it.
Because I know that's what happens when, like, an apple turns brown.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Oxidation is basically a loss of electrons,
Okay.
and this often happens in the presence of oxygen. It's responsible for browning in fruits and vegetables, but it also plays a key role in developing flavors in things like tea and even aged cheese.
Oh, so that's why black tea is so much bolder than green tea.
You got it? Black tea leaves go through a much longer oxidation process,
Interesting.
and that's what gives them those deeper colors and bolder flavors. Green tea, on the other hand, is minimally oxidized.
Hmm.
That's why it has a lighter color and a more delicate taste.
Okay, so sometimes oxidation is a good thing and sometimes we want to avoid it.
Exactly. For fruits and vegetables, adding a little bit of acid like some lemon juice can help slow down that browning process.
Right.
And for things like meat, storing it properly is key to preventing unwanted oxidation and spoilage.
Gotcha. So we've talked about oxidation. What about reduction? I know that's used to, like, concentrate flavors,
Hmm.
but how does that actually work?
Basically, reduction is all about simmering a liquid
Okay.
to evaporate some of that water content, leaving behind a more concentrated and flavorful solution. It's super common for sauces, soups, and even jams and jellies.
Right, so that's why those long-simmered sauces have such a depth of flavor.
That's exactly it.
It's amazing how something as simple as simmering can do so much. And speaking of simple, what happens when you just soak beans or lentils? Is there some kind of chemical reaction going on there too?
You bet. Soaking those legumes is actually a form of hydrolysis.
Okay.
It's where water molecules break down complex molecules in the beans.
Mm.
And this makes them easier to digest and even more flavorful.
Wow, so hydrolysis is at work even before we even start cooking.
It's true.
This is making me rethink everything I do in the kitchen.
Right. It's all about those invisible processes. Speaking of invisible processes, let's talk about one of the most fascinating aspects of cooking. Fermentation.
Ooh, like yogurt, cheese, and sourdough bread. I'm intrigued.
Exactly. Fermentation is a metabolic process where tiny microorganisms like bacteria or yeast
Right.
convert sugars into other substances, things like acids, gases, or alcohol.
So when we're making yogurt, we're actually cultivating bacteria to like transform milk into something completely different?
That's exactly right. The bacteria eat the lactose in the milk
Oh, wow.
and produce lactic acid, and that gives yogurt its tangy flavor and that thick texture.
Mm.
And with sourdough bread, it's those wild yeasts creating those characteristic sour flavors in airy pockets.
It's incredible how we can harness these tiny organisms to create such a wide range of flavors.
It really shows the connection between nature and human ingenuity in the culinary world.
This is all so fascinating. I feel like I'm finally starting to understand like the why behind the what in the kitchen.
That's great to hear. And we've only scratched the surface.
Well, I'm ready to go deeper. What other surprising reactions are we going to uncover today?
Well, let's talk about something called the Leidenfrost effect.
The Leidenfrost effect.
Yeah, you've probably even seen it without realizing it.
Okay, I think you're going to have to explain this one.
All right, so imagine you're sprinkling like little droplets of water onto a really hot pan.
Mm,
Instead of just instantly evaporating,
yeah.
those water droplets bead up and kind of dance around on the surface.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
That's the Leidenfrost effect in action. What's happening is the liquid comes in contact with a surface that's way hotter than its boiling point.
Okay.
And so this layer of vapor forms between the liquid and the hot surface.
Interesting.
And that insulates the droplet and allows it to just glide around.
So it's like the water droplet is levitating on a cushion of steam.
That's a great way to put it.
Ooh.
And you can see this with other liquids too, like oil or even molten metal.
Really?
And it actually plays a role in cooking, especially when you're searing meat or stir-frying vegetables.
Oh, now that you mention it, sometimes when I'm searing a steak, it seems like it almost floats above the pan for a few seconds. Is that the Leidenfrost effect?
That's exactly what it is. So that vapor layer is acting like a barrier.
Hmm.
It's preventing the steak from making direct contact with that super hot pan surface.
So the Leidenfrost effect is actually preventing the steak from burning.
That's right. It's a delicate balance, though,
Okay.
because you need a little bit of the Leidenfrost effect to help cook the steak evenly.
Hmm.
But if that pan isn't hot enough, you're not going to get that good sear that we were talking about before.
It's crazy how these little details can make such a difference in our cooking.
It really is.
Okay, what else do we have in store for our culinary chemistry adventure?
Well, let's talk about pressure cooking. It's become really popular, and it uses some pretty cool science.
I have to admit, pressure cookers have always intimidated me a little. They just seem so intense. What exactly makes them different from regular pots and pans?
Pressure cookers are basically sealed vessels,
Okay.
and they trap steam inside, which increases the pressure.
Hmm.
And that higher pressure actually raises the boiling point of water.
Oh, wow.
So this lets food cook at higher temperatures, which means it cooks way faster.
So it's like speeding up the cooking process by creating a superheated steam environment.
Exactly. And that higher temperature and pressure really helps break down those tough fibers in food, makes it tender and flavorful much more quickly.
Like way faster than just cooking on the stovetop.
Right, like think about how long it takes to cook dried beans on the stove compared to a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
It's a huge difference.
So that explains why pressure cookers are so great for things like stews and soups. But I've also heard that you can use them for baking.
Absolutely. Baking in a pressure cooker is becoming more and more popular,
Really?
especially for things like cheesecakes and custards.
Wow, I never would have thought of that. So we've covered pressure cooking. What other culinary chemistry secrets are we going to unlock today?
Let's talk about gluten. It's a protein found in wheat, barley, and rye,
Okay.
and it really impacts the texture of baked goods.
Gluten-free diets have become super popular lately, but honestly, I don't really understand what gluten actually does.
Well, gluten is what gives bread its elasticity,
Okay.
its chewiness. When you mix flour and water, those gluten proteins form these long, stretchy strands.
Hmm.
As you knead the dough, those strands align and create a network, and that network traps all the gas bubbles that are produced by yeast or other leavening agents.
So it's like gluten is building this web that helps the dough rise and keep its shape.
Exactly. And the amount of gluten in flour can really affect the final texture. Like, bread flour has more gluten than all-purpose flour,
Hmm.
which is why it gives you those chewier loaves.
Ah, that makes sense. So that's why a lot of gluten-free baked goods can have a different texture.
Exactly, they don't have that gluten network.
Makes sense.
So gluten-free baking often uses other ingredients and techniques to try and get a similar texture and structure. It's like a whole different world of culinary chemistry.
Well, this deep dive has been amazing.
Yeah.
I'm really starting to appreciate all the science that goes into making even the simplest dishes.
It's pretty remarkable how much we can learn just by exploring the chemistry of cooking.
It really is.
We've uncovered so many culinary secrets already.
It's been a wild ride through the world of food science.
It really has. My mind is buzzing with all these new insights. So how can we actually use all this knowledge in our everyday cooking?
Well, one of the most important things is understanding the role of heat.
Okay.
If you know the temperature ranges for things like the Maillard reaction
Right.
or caramelization,
Mm.
that can really help you get those perfect results, whether it's a beautifully seared steak
Right.
or a pan of golden brown roasted vegetables.
So instead of just following recipes, we can start to make smarter decisions in the kitchen.
Exactly. And it's not just about temperature. Understanding how acids and bases work can really take your cooking to a whole new level. We talk about how acids can tenderize meat in marinades.
Right. But a little splash of lemon juice can also brighten up the flavors and
Hmm.
balance out the richness in a dish.
Like adding lemon to a creamy pasta sauce
Yeah.
or a hearty stew.
Exactly. It cuts through that richness and adds a nice bright touch.
And baking soda is a base, right?
It is.
And that's essential for baking.
Absolutely. Knowing how baking soda reacts with acids to make all those airy bubbles can really make or break your cakes, cookies, and quick breads.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely had my share of baking disasters, so I could use all the help I can get.
Well, understanding the chemistry behind those leavening agents can save you a lot of trouble.
Good to know. And we can't forget about water.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it's so important for hydrating beans and lentils,
Right.
but also for things like steaming and pressure cooking.
It's true. Water is a key player in so many culinary transformations.
It really is amazing how such a simple ingredient can have such a big impact on flavor, texture, and even how quickly things cook.
You're absolutely right. And speaking of simple ingredients, we can't forget about salt.
That's so
Because it's not just a seasoning.
Mm.
It enhances flavors,
Right.
it can tenderize meat,
Okay.
and it's even crucial for fermentation.
Wow, salt really is a culinary multitasker.
I know, right?
This deep dive has been incredible.
Glad you enjoyed it.
It's really eye-opening to see just how much science goes into making even the simplest dishes.
It's fascinating how much we can learn by exploring the chemistry of everyday cooking, right?
Absolutely. Do you have any final words of wisdom before we wrap things up?
Just remember that cooking is both an art and a science.
Hmm.
Don't be afraid to trust your instincts,
Right.
experiment with flavors, and most importantly, have fun.
Yeah,
Sometimes the best things come from those happy little accidents in the kitchen.
I love that.